Welcome to Both Sides of Beehives. I'm Beth Arts Ives. I'm really glad you're here. As a neurodivergent and disabled social worker, I have the pleasure of helping people talk about the themes that are impacting their everyday life and get to also see how these topics resonate with my own lived experiences. We're going to talk about the stories that impact our life, the meaning that we make about our own experiences, and what labels might impact how we make sense and wrap our head around what we've gone through. We're going to talk about my poem, Unreliable Narrators, which was featured in Poet's Choice, Nemesis, Stitch in Time, Saves 9, Unreliable Narrators. For so long, I read chapters written by unreliable narrators. I got lost in the stories, scribed by unreal imaginations. In those days, I would find myself hanging on their every word. I longed to be seen and reflected in the stories they artfully wrote. I didn't know the hours spent curating a world that did not exist. I sped through their versions trying to learn every subplot to save the lead. I swallowed down when their stories became richer and tales began to outpace my reality. I took notes as the pages filled and the chapters soon contradicted themselves. I reached out to other characters when the volumes began to drown out my voice. I met townspeople whose recounts differed severely from my own. I heard anecdotes I considered far-fetched, documented on papers that could not be produced. I kept searching for fear that I was somehow the one to be remiss, only to find more diaries and artifacts that I had hidden when I fled from town. Tucked in frames were secret messages to remind me of my fearful fate. Etched on scraps, I found old codes that unlocked the truths from my past. The books they wrote I now marked up with struck-through lines and blacked-out text. While bound and co-authored, appearing polished from afar, they were fables more than facts. For the stories they wrote were mere accounts from the vantage point of many unreliable acts. I sounded the alarm and wrote the authors directly, for fear that they were shared without preface. They must have known their stories read as truth, when they knew all along they were false. With letters penned to share the news and mistakes overlooked, responses came in from the authors themselves that punctuation in fact had been removed. While the remorse was suggested, the books remained polished, on the grounds of no fatal flaw found. How could one decide, once fact-checked and clarified, that their work was still that of awe? To be proclaimed as gospel and sung throughout the land, to be read more boldly than ever before. The detective still determined to educate the masses, ever certain bloodshed would find belief. With scars still raw that once felt sun, the doors of many became boarded up. No wounds deep enough, no voice loud enough for those choosing their slumber. Why take the risk and look inside, only to find the gore held deeply within? For what if they too held pencils in their hands and added to the imageries and tragedies? While they chose their sluggish sermons for themselves, things were different for the reader turned detective, once puzzled for so long. Townspeople were not misled. Characters were not held captive. Co-authors were not unchecked. Believers were not mistook. The craft had been studied, curated for a greater purpose, one worth publishing and distributing at all costs. For an unreliable narrator adores their version above all else, with no desire to highlight the lack of facts. They included their parts, cited passages most fitting to plots they weaved from their throne. For they didn't stop at one copy or risk the truth being known when they knew the weight they bore on their bones. If you ever doubt their credibility or question their sources, beware there isn't space for researchers in their world. Turn your sword into a pen, for your mighty testimony can still be written in a new land that values the truth held inside. It's not too late for your own proclamation when unreliable narrators write the story of your life. I opted to print it out so you could get a full appreciation for how I structured it. As you'll see, there's a sense of a zigzag pattern, and this idea of the writer trying to understand what's happening, and these little jolts of reality, these little moments where they have an epiphany or they realize the math isn't mathing. But then they're brought back into the version of events that have been portrayed by someone else, where things seem like they should make sense. They should add up. If so many people feel this way, there has to be truth to it. And we experience this going back and forth that oneself really experiences when they're being gaslit, or again, there's a narration, there's a story that's being shared that doesn't match the person's truth. And so at the end, we see that there's a conclusion, there's a definitive end where the writer can go, okay, I have solved the mystery, I've put all the clues together, I've put on my detective hat, and this is what I've come up with. And so that is what the process of writing Unreliable Narrators felt like for me. It was this moment of taking back the paintbrush, of taking back the canvas, after looking at the whole piece and going, this doesn't feel true to me. This doesn't look like me. This isn't the colors that I would have used. These aren't the lines or the movements that I was experiencing. There are parts that are splashes of color that I knew were dark gray and black and so deeply full of depression and despair. And there are the other parts that have been painted over or pretended that they didn't even exist, or just are footnotes at the very corner that no one else will see, that were monumental for me. They are my greatest inspirations. They are pivotal pieces of my experience. And so when we think of our own narration, it's so important that we take a step back and look at the whole piece and go, does this fit for me? Where have I contributed to this piece? What examples or evidence would lead someone to create this masterpiece that they are in awe of, that they show off, that they want people to be so impressed by because they think they created it? When in reality, it's fake. It's a facade. It's a work of art, but it is not realism. It is not accurate. It is made up. And sometimes fairy tales or artwork that we get lost in, or songs that feel unbelievable, shows that are so far-fetched, resonate with us. They're fantastical. They give us an escape. But when it's supposed to be our truth, when it's supposed to be our life and our story, and our voice is the one that's silenced, our voice is the one that's shushed, when someone doesn't want our critique or our feedback or a correction, at some point we realize maybe there's a different purpose to this. Maybe it's because it fits with all of the other masterpieces and all of the other people included in this gallery. Maybe it's meant to fit in. Maybe it's meant to look like all of the other ones, when in reality, you stand out. You are the outlier. What is most important is when someone gets our story wrong, when someone misunderstands us, there's this moment where they get to decide, do I want to understand the person in front of me? Do I believe them that they are the expert on their experience? And so I'm going to take what they say to heart, and I'm going to change the concept of them that I have in my head to better reflect what they feel is true. And we do that all the time. As a therapist, I misunderstand my clients in moments. I mishear a phrase. I might think that something was really important to them and they've changed their mind on that. They may use different pronouns. They may go by a different name. It will all change and evolve. And it's my job to change with it and to be open to that. When clients choose to correct me when I've misheard them, or maybe just outright misunderstood, that is the greatest privilege, when someone says, I care enough about our relationship and what you mean to me that I'm going to give you the chance to do better. And sometimes it's really embarrassing and humiliating, and we don't like making mistakes. We don't like being in the wrong. But when someone decides to give us that chance to do better, or to update our reference point about them and their story, it's the greatest privilege, because they don't owe that to us. No one owes us their story. But when they say, I want you to get it right, so I'm going to give you that correction, I'm going to have you change that word, That is the coolest experience. And our healthiest relationships also allow for that, right? It gives us the chance to get closer, to deepen our relationship, to ask great questions, to bring a curiosity about their own reality. But where this gets difficult is when there's an unreliable narrator who is determined to keep their version, who does not want there to be edits, who is convinced this is how it's supposed to be. This is the mold or the idea or the model that benefits me the most. It might get me the most credit. It might get me praise. It might get me pity. It might get me sympathy. What matters is less about what that person is getting or benefiting from your version or their version that they're upholding, but instead realizing it is not true. This does not match with me, and the people around us should want to update it. But when we confront an unreliable narrator and we say, hey, I think you got the facts wrong. I think that your vantage point might be flawed or biased or might have something else that's motivating it. If they don't want to confront it, if you are met with defensiveness or a desire to share that version of events even more loudly or even more boldly, if someone says, no, this is correct and I am not looking to make these changes, that is when we have to take stock and say, am I going to fight them on the frame that they put around my portrait? Am I going to argue that the color of my hair is wrong? Am I going to nitpick the chip in my tooth? Or am I going to decide I cannot overhaul this entire portrait, especially if they have people standing guard protecting it, saying, no, we want it the way it is? Because a lot of times it's not one unreliable narrator. There are others who are perpetuating it. There are others who are participating for one reason or another. Maybe because the change is scary to them. Maybe because they also feel like it would create so much ripple effects that they don't want to confront. There's a lot of different reasons that this happens. But I want us to remember there's power in our story. There is control and autonomy that we get when we reclaim what is ours. Even if it means leaving the gallery, even if it means walking away and saying, I can't repaint this whole piece, especially if you're going behind and making changes or making faces behind my back as I do it to others who are snickering and know they're not going to look at the painting different, even if you changed everything about it, right? These dynamics can become abusive. They can become destructive, especially if trying to belittle us or question our reality is something they are encouraging in us, right? We hold that power, but it can get very confusing, especially if it's someone that we look up to or we respect or we're led to believe they know us well or they've known us for a really long time. That doesn't constitute them being incorrect. And again, the people who love us, the people who show up for us, want to be corrected. They want us to clarify. They want us to really understand us deeply. And when it's just a painting that exists as some historical monument or some snapshot of a moment with no desire to put even more versions to come, that is when we may find ourselves having to walk away because there's no room for conversation. We are supposed to be our storytellers. We are supposed to be the ones narrating our experiences, sharing and describing what has happened to us and how we felt and how it impacted our sense of selves. And when people are not open to that, it's important we take stock of that and we listen to who they are. And when they show us who they are, we believe them.